I work at a nuclear power plant, but the haunted shadows lurking in the dark are unbelievable. I never should have opened that door. It felt wrong the moment I touched the cold, metal handle. I was doing my usual rounds, just another night at the plant. The hum of machines filled the air, a comforting blanket in this isolated place. But there was something off tonight. A chill crawled down my spine. It whispered my name. The lights flickered overhead, illuminating the long corridor. Shadows danced against the walls, twisting and writhing. That dark corridor had a way of feeling claustrophobic, even in its vastness. It smelled of steel and something else, something sour, like old secrets that had been buried too deep. Then came the noises. A faint squeaking metal against metal. My heart raced. I stopped. For a beat, silence wrapped around me, heavy and thick. All I could hear was the pounding of my own heartbeat. I moved forward slowly, every step sending a tremor through the floor. Suddenly, something shifted in the corner of my eye. I turned. Nothing. Just darkness. My breaths quickened. Was I alone? I could feel the weight of unseen eyes watching, feeling the air become denser, colder. Then a loud clang. An old Valvia piece of equipment we had secured swung open as if it were alive. I froze, dread curling around my chest. I was sure I had bolted it shut. The hairs on my neck stood on end. Hello. I called, my voice shaky. It echoed back, mocking me. All I got in return was the sound of my own fear. Then, a whisper soft, almost seductive. Help me. My skin crawled, each word scraping against my senses. I stepped back. Something in my gut twisted. I was in a place where lives were at stake, not a place for fantasies or ghosts. Yet, the shadows grew darker. The air felt charged, as if a storm were coming. In that moment, I understood, I wasn't alone. Then the lights went out. Pure darkness swallowed me whole. Panic roared in my chest, drowning out reason. I fumbled in the pitch black, seeking an escape. Suddenly, a figure loomed in front of me, tall and shadowy. I couldn't breathe. The scream choked in my throat as the presence drifted closer. Hey, before we continue with this amazing story, I need to give you an important heads up. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube unsubscribed them without warning. Take a quick second to check the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I'd hate for you to miss any of the exclusive content coming soon. And while you're there, smash that like button, it really helps me out with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who's part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's connect. The weight of the shadow pressed against me, its form barely discernible in the total blackness. I could feel its chill gnawing at the edges of my sanity, a creeping numbness that infiltrated my very bones. I tried to turn away, but the air thickened, trapping me like prey in a spider's web. Help me, the whisper echoed again, but now it bore a sense of urgency, twisting into a groan, a wail filled with despair. My instinct was to flee, to sprint down the corridor and forget this tormenting entity, but my legs felt rooted to the floor, frozen by the disembodied voice. The figure hovered closer, its presence swirling like smoke around me. I caught a fleeting glimpse of jagged features, a face warped in pain and anger, eyes that burned with a pleading darkness. You can't leave, it rasped. Then, all at once, a flicker of light crackled to life, illuminating a fractured scene. I found myself surrounded by ghostly images, workers in hazmat suits, faces contorted in terror, their mouths frozen in silent screams. They filled the corridor like specters of a long-forgotten catastrophe, their eyes wide with anguish, staring into a void I couldn't fathom. The whispers surged, a chorus of souls trapped in this purgatory, their combined despair washing over me like a tidal wave. Join us, they beckoned, their spectral fingers reaching, ever reaching, as though they could pull me into their darkness. That in a primal instinct, I closed my eyes and held my breath, forcing myself to center on the tangible remnants of reality. I groped for the wall, fingers brushing against the cool, steel surface. I needed to move, to escape this haunting theater. Then, a loud bang echoed through the corridor. It reverberated in my chest like a thunderclap. I opened my eyes to see the machinery around me rattling violently, a cacophony of metal wailing as if the entire plant was alive, writhing and screaming. The lights blinked erratically, and for a moment, I could see the shadows converging on my position, morphing into something far more grotesque, their gnarly hands reaching through the darkness, clawing toward me. "Help us!" The figure from before shouted again, now with eyes as black as the abyss. Panic surged within me. I staggered away from the spirit still marching forward into the disarray, trying to keep a grasp on what was real. But the echoes, the haunting calls only grew louder, drowning my thoughts in despair. I turned. I had to run. I pushed past the ephemeral shapes that flickered in and out of existence, their eyes boring into my soul. I felt their cold embrace snagging at my clothes, pulling me back into their tragic fate. Then I stumbled into a doorway, a maintenance room, I realized. I slammed the door behind me and leaned against it, breathing heavily. My heart was a drum in my ears, each beat a reminder of the looming horror outside. The room was dimly lit, filled with tools and old equipment scattered across countertops. But in the far corner was something unnatural, a glass chamber, which hummed ominously, faint blue light glowing from within. Curiosity battled with the terror that gripped me, but something compelled me forward. As I stepped closer, I squinted against the light, spotting someone inside the chamber. Their mouth moved, forming words I couldn't hear. A hand pressed against the glass, desperately reaching out. It was a face I recognized, but couldn't comprehend, my own, trapped in this nightmarish tableau, locked away behind a barrier of cold glass as the shadows swirled around us. "Get out!" The reflection screamed silently. I staggered back, the reality that I was losing myself, consumed by the darkness, crashing down upon me. Then, the reflection twisted into a grin, an evil, knowing smile. The shadow behind me drifted closer still. "You're already ours." Before I could react, the door burst open, and the shadows surged into the room like a wave of blackened energy. They enveloped me, pulling me toward the chamber where my own horrified face grinned back. Darkness rolled over me, swallowing every scream, every plea for salvation. All I could hear was laughter, distant and echoing, a taunting symphony as I faded into the terror that awaited. I woke up gasping, the sterile smell of the maintenance room assailing my senses. For a moment, the all-encompassing dread had lifted, leaving in its wake only confusion. I blinked against the half-light, the tremors of terror clinging to my skin, an unshakable residue of the nightmare I just escaped. With trepidation, I pushed myself up from the cold concrete floor, wincing at the slight sting in my palms, a reminder of my frantic fall. My breath steadied as I glanced around, trying to pick apart the remnants of my memory. The glass chamber loomed ahead, a forbidding structure that pulsed faintly, echoing with the sound of my heart. I took a cautious step closer. The crystalline surface was smooth, but I could see currents of dust swirling within, caught in a gravity I could not comprehend. Flickering shadows danced across the walls, and in their chaotic flicker, I swore I could see faces forming, panicked souls, searching and yearning. Suddenly, the faint hum of machinery rose in pitch. I turned to see the door that had swung open earlier now stood ajar, revealing only a suffocating blackness beyond. My heart quickened again. The corridor outside felt alive, a creeping thing waiting to crash in, hungry to consume whatever remained of me. But something pulled me back to the chamber. My reflection within seemed to hold a strange magnetism, the way it pressed against the glass with both longing and sorrow. I felt drawn to approach it once more. The grinning specter that was me swayed faintly, and its mouth opened and closed, a silent plea formed with panicked zeal. As I leaned against the chamber, I was taken by the sensation of heat, an otherworldly warmth that seemed to thrum against my skin. It was as if the very essence of the entities I had encountered before wrapped around the glass like a blanket of darkness, constricting, whispering secrets of the damned. An urge surged within me to connect with the shadow that gnawed at the edges of my consciousness, to reach through the glass and claim my fate. Then, the room dimmed, its light flickering violently as the shadows outside swelled. I heard muffled voices rising within the muted chaos, a chorus of pleading wails, desperate and forlorn, echoing the very essence of despair I had encountered earlier. The glass beneath my fingertips began to chill, and a sensation akin to breath whispered against my neck, alien and invasive. Break the barrier, the voices urged, a grotesque symphony rising around me, growing omnipresent, suffocating me in its terror that I hesitated, caught between the maddening urge to surrender and the instinct to flee. But the reflection, still twisted in that malevolent grin, mouthed words that bled through the air, an echo of my very thoughts. You want to know? I tore my gaze away, the chilling reality of my circumstances crashing against the fragile tether to sanity. But from the corner of my eye, I saw something stirring just outside the door. A figure, dark and blurring, twisting like smoke, morphing into something grotesque, a sinuous approximation of once what might have been human. Its eyes were hollow voids, glimmering with a hunger that sent icy tendrils down my spine. Help! Its voice, once a whisper, now bore a jagged edge, an incantation that clawed at my mind. Help us, join us before it's too late. And just like that, the reflection surged forward, crashing against the glass like a storm at sea. The room quivered as shadows crashed into me, and the howling voices rose to a fever pitch, merging into an unbearable cacophony that I was losing my grip on reality, falling into the space where the boundaries of existence blurred. Every part of me screamed to run, to escape, but the shadows were relentless. They twisted and entwined like serpents, enticing me with promises of knowledge, of power, of a release I couldn't yet fathom. And then, as a deep, throaty laugh echoed, reverberating like thunder through the room, the glass began to crack under the immense pressure of the darkness closing in. Welcome to the family, my twisted reflection echoed, its laughter merging with that deeply sinister call of the shadows. With the final crack resounding in the air, I felt the glass shatter, felt the shards slice through reality itself. An icy gust enveloped me, my heart pounding against my ribs as the threshold I fought to hold back dissolved like mist. As I plunged into the void, my final glimpse was of the reflection still laughing, but now, it was not alone. Hundreds of other souls, lost and twinkling like distant stars, surged around me, writhing in the darkness, reaching for their escape, and then it was darkness pure and devastating. I was weightless, engulfed in the suffocating embrace of the unknown, and as the laughter faded away, one thought clawed into my mind: I was no longer alone. The ground swallowed me whole, and I was left with only one haunting truth. Somehow, I had just begun to understand the real horror of this place. The darkness was not void. It was thick, pulsating, swirling with a malevolent intent that surged with each breath I dared to take. As I floated in that abyss, the grasping shadows pulled at my limbs, tightening their hold with an insidious familiarity. I tried to scream, the air was caught in my throat, choked by a despair so potent I felt it physically weigh me down. Suddenly, a flicker of light sliced through the blackness, illuminating the space with a pale glow. Shadows recoiled as outlines of figures emerged, drifting spectral forms that spun and danced like echoes of an unearthly ballet. Desperation clawed at my chest, and I pressed forward in futile resistance against the burgeoning tide. Amongst the undulating phantoms, I spotted faces, their eyes hollow yet painfully aware, mouths agape in silent screams, their expressions a mirror of my own terror. They were remnants of the damned, some semblance of humanity still flickered within them, trapped in this eternal twilight. A woman, her features gaunt and twisted, reached toward me, her fingers brushing my wrist in a fleeting touch that sent icy shivers coursing through my body. Help us, she pleaded softly, each word carrying the weight of crushed hope. This place, it holds us. You have to break the cycle. Before I could respond, a cacophony of anguished voices escalated around me, merging into an impassioned song of mournful longing. My surroundings distorted as the shadows clasped tighter, dragging me deeper into their chilling embrace. I felt reality splintering beneath my feet, the ground pulsed like a heartbeat, and if I listened closely, I could hear whispers taunting my every thought: release us, join us, endless knowledge awaits. I stumbled back, wrestling with the growing dread. The edges of my perception wobbled, I was drowning in the ethereal voices, and panic surged anew, carving out reason like a sculptor chiseling away at marble. I longed for a solid surface to stand on, a touch of reality amidst the pandemonium, when suddenly I was yanked sideways, the spectral dance surrounding me mingling into a storm of spirits. They moved in closer, swirling faster, encircling me as a cyclone of despair. My breath caught, fear crystallizing into an icy grip. The woman's face came into greater focus, her haunted eyes glistened with something akin to pleading but also with a spark of rage. Remember us. You are not the first to be engulfed by this darkness. It wants to trap you like it did us, like it did him. She pointed, and as the haze shifted, I was struck by the realization that amidst the murky shadows lurked a semblance of the glass chamber I once stood before. Only now it was shattered, splinters floating like orchids in twilight, each shard a memory, a fragment of anguish destined to be forgotten. A brief image flickered before Meth Man, who once was, gaunt and broken, gazing into the abyss with longing. A name whispered through the murmurs, a name I had never known, yet it resonated with an intimate familiarity, echoing in my soul. Elliot, Elliot. My heart raced as the shadows surged like a tidal wave. I looked back to the woman, desperation choking the life from my voice. Who is he? What happened? But before she could answer, the world convulsed. Screams erupted, reverberating through the churning mass of souls, a primal fear that sent them careening away from something dreadful closing in. A silhouette materialized in the distance, colossal and looming, something utterly horrifying. The edges were jagged, surreal, a hideous amalgamation of flesh and shadow, twisting and reforming. Its many eyes glittered with a nightmarish luminescence, fixated on me with predatory intensity. It was a specter of gluttonous despair, a harbinger of the darkness that festered in this accursed limbo. Feed on their fear, joined the lost, it hissed, a voice like razor wire scraping against my sanity. In that moment, the oppressing weight of fate settled upon my shoulders. What choice did I have? Terrified, I turned back to the woman, but she was slipping away, her resolve crumbling in the face of that monstrous entity. Remember, find Elliot. Break the cycle. She cried as tendrils of shadow began to pull her back into the ever-hungry darkness. No. I shouted, reaching out. I felt something warm, pulsing through my veins, as if my own essence was drawn toward her. It ignited a spark of defiance. But my resolve shattered at the sight of the looming horror in pursuit, and as I turned once more, the world around me spiraled into an unfathomable descent. More figures joined the dance now, their faces contorted in fear, merging into the hideous mass of shadows, all reaching. They seemed to be calling me, pleading for release, for the chance to escape. Suddenly, the shadowy figure lunged, a spear of darkness piercing the space between us, and I felt my mind fracturing under the weight of their pleas. The darkness, stretching, consuming everything before it, embraced the inevitable. It roared, and before I knew it, I felt the pull of the abyss tightening its vice around my heart, dragging me down at an unforgiving pace. As I disappeared into the depths of the shadowy tempest, the last thing I heard was a fragmented whisper, echoing amongst the howls. Elliot's legacy will never end until you face the truth. And with that, I plunged into the unknown, free-falling into my own despair. As the shadows swirled above me, hunger unquenched and eternity stretching before me, I fell, the encompassing darkness wrapping itself around me like a cloying fog, instilling a terror so profound that it gnawed at the core of my being. The endless descent felt surreal, each moment stretched painfully as though time itself had bowed to the shadows, holding me for a torment that seemed poised to last an eternity. My heart thundered in my chest, an insistent drumbeat that drowned out the whispers of the lost, their cries fading into the inky void. Suddenly, I collided with a floor that felt both real and imagined, solid yet insubstantial. I gasped, forcing air into my lungs, tasting the metallic tang of dread swirling in the atmosphere. I pushed myself up, uncertainly clawing through the oppressive mist, a chilling realization dawning upon me. I was no longer with the figures of the damned but was instead marooned, stranded in a different nightmare. As I stood in that shrouded place, memories began to fragment and intertwine with the darkness around me, each ghostly whisper I could hear coiling round my mind. A labored breath traced through my lips. The echoes of Elliot's name thrummed in my ears like a sinister refrain. He had been a name impatiently waiting to be unearthed, a lifeline I needed to grasp if I had even a chance of escaping this hellish realm. I turned slowly, drawn in by a faint illumination nudging the periphery of my vision. It was a flickering glow emanating from a series of rusting consoles, the remnants of what felt like an abandoned control room. A sickly yellow light bathed the machinery, highlighting the layers of dust that shrouded them. Vertical tubes crisscrossed the walls like veins, pumping substances that had long ago solidified into a grotesque tableau of life and desolation. My instincts warned me to turn back to the darkness, yet curiosity propelled me towards the consoles. The air thickened with an acrid tang, stinging my eyes and igniting an instinctive panic. Grime caked the control panel as I gingerly pressed a button, a dull hum emanating from the machinery that startled me into full awareness. As if responding to my interference, the screens flickered to life, showcasing flashes of distorted images, charred landscapes, shadowy figures scuttling away from the lurking dark, and glimpses of the gasping faces from before. The clips replayed in jarring silence. I felt my breath quicken as each vivid scene wove itself deeper into my psyche, intertwined now with a palpable dread that clung to my bones. The glow intensified, bifurcating the shadows that lurked just beyond the screens. They recoiled as a fierce wind erupted from somewhere deep within the control room, slinging dust and debris like a tempest. I realized, horrified, that my own face appeared on one of the monitors, a ghostly reflection fragmented by static and shadows, yet undeniably me. My heart raced. "Your journey is not over, is it?" A voice hissed, reverberating from the dark edges of the control room, a malicious timbre that slithered along my spine. "You're tethered to this power, bound to the suffering that generated it." That I swung around, searching for a source amid the grim apparatus, but the room seemed to dissolve, echoing with disembodied laughter that seeped into every crevice. My palms pressed against the control panel, hoping for anything that could anchor me. It was then that I noticed faint markings on the console beneath my fingertips, a name etched in desperation, Elliot Lancaster. It read. Reality wavered. The profound sense of despair injected itself into my veins, and with it, a vision exploded. Concepts of nuclear cores, reactors, and catastrophic failures flickered through my mind. I tore my gaze away from the screens and swiveled back, attempting to flee the room. But the shadows writhed, pulling me back as desperate whispers echoed, chanting, "The power resides here, it binds you." The monstrous form from earlier lurked at the edges of the faint glow, only now it stood more defined, pulsating as if it thrummed with energy, an embodiment of dread and consequence. I sought a way out, my heart pounding violently even as it echoed with every uncertain thundering heartbeat of the shadow beast. Then came a thunderous crash, and the ground shook beneath me, splintering as fissures opened. I watched in horror as the walls began to bleed darkness, creeping chaos threading through like a sentient force eager to claim me. The great entity loomed larger, unfurling grotesque limbs of swirling shadows, creeping closer, its eyes festooned with wicked malevolence. "I am the dawn of oblivion," it bellowed, reverberating through the fraying air, "and no one leaves without paying the price." Raising its unearthly form, it drew in a breath, and I felt the room pulsate, drawing me towards it as a vortex of shadows swirled hungrily, beckoning. The air trembled, saturated with dark promises. With a surge of frantic determination, I tore my eyes from the creature and lunged toward the flickering control panel. If Elliot's name anchored me to this horror, perhaps unlocking its mystery would free me as well. But before I could act, the shadows twisted like serpents, capturing my legs and pulling me down into their suffocating embrace. Even as I screamed, the howls of both terror and fury merging into one desperate cry that hung in the air long after I was swallowed whole. And just as everything faded into oblivion, I heard the haunting echo of Elliot's name rising against the looming darkness, a sepulchral whisper that promised something terrible yet unresolved. The darkness that enveloped me felt like a sentient thing, eager and insatiable, as I was drawn further down into its depths. My screams, swallowed by the void, left me with a haunting silence that reverberated in my skull. The sensation of being pulled apart was blinding, the tendrils of shadow grasping and clawing at my mind, threatening to rip away any remnants of cohesion. In that relentless pull, fragments of memories surged, wars fought and lost in secret corners of my life, tangential images of Elliot flickering on the edges. I was thrust into memories of laughter and warmth, and then ensnared within nightmares painted in shades of hopelessness and despair. I felt a sudden jolt of familiarity as the name echoed again, Elliot, transforming from a desperate cry into a desperate plea. Just as swiftly as I was pulled into the abyss, the darkness released its grip, casting me onto a cold, sterile floor. I gasped and sat up, disoriented. I was now lodged amidst a new nightmare, a macabre replica of the control room above, its walls striated with grime and anguish, but now it pulsed, the very air crackling with an electric tension. Instead of flickering screens, jagged wires protruded like skeletal fingers, clawing at the air with a frantic energy that in the flickering dimness, I could see horrific images playing out on the walls, not of charred landscapes this time, but anguished faces twisted in agony, their mouths open in eternal screams. The cries rose into a dreadful choir, harmonizing into a symphony of terror that assaulted my senses, blurring the line between sound and the macabre visuals that haunted my waking moments. A chill crept over me as the familiar whisper of Elliot's name coiled in the air like smoke, warping the very fabric of the space around me. I stumbled forward, feeling my way through the shadowy landscape that resembled the control room but was vast and distorted. I resisted the urge to retreat, hoping for any trace of him, even as I felt the darkness inching closer, eager to consume. Suddenly, something flickered to Lithia's single console, pristine in its isolation, glowing with an unnatural light. The surface crackled, welcoming yet ominous, urging me to connect to whatever pulse of humanity still resided within this throbbing chaos. My hands moved instinctively, gliding over the controls, trembling as I activated the machinery. The screen erupted into brilliance, illuminating a ghastly scene. The shadow creature writhed in the center, its terrible form flanked by ethereal chains that sparked with raw energy. Below was a sprawling map of the plant, dotted with pulsing red readings, all converging upon one point: the reactor. I felt bile rise in my throat as the realization struck. The core was not merely a source of energy, it was a prison, holding captive all the lost souls it had devoured, including Elliot's. Confusion wrapped itself around my mind like a tightening noose. My heartbeat echoed louder than the dreadful wails that surrounded me, each pulse dragging me further into the truth. I looked away from the screen but found myself confronted by the grotesque form hovering just out of reach, an unfathomable hunger brimming in its many sets of eyes. Reclamation is near, it hissed, the voice a sinister growl that reverberated through every inch of my body. Feed me your anguish and your quest for life, and I will give you the one you seek. No. I shouted, desperation igniting a dormant fire within me. I won't let you take anyone else. But the walls of the room began to shift, pulsating along with the monstrous creature, trying to consume the last vestiges of my hope. Hazy remnants of Elliot's laughter danced through the air, so close yet tantalizingly out of reach, a promise wrapped in a taunt. Without thinking, I turned back to the console, frantically typing commands, hoping to reverse whatever dark binding held Elliot captive within the reactor. The screens bombarded me with blaring alerts, the chaos rising, growing ever more frantic as the shadows clawed at my skin. I could feel time becoming elastic, stretching into a panicked eternity. Futility, the creature bellowed, its maw expanding, an echoing void ready to swallow my resolve whole. And then, all at once, everything changed. The screen flared dramatically, showing Elliot's face, wide-eyed and terrified, suspended amid a swirling vortex of energy, ghostly chains binding him. I could almost reach out to him, but the darkness surged with an infernal howl, stretching like nails scraping against glass, as the sinister presence lunged toward me. Give me what I need. It roared, launching itself around the console. I stumbled backward, adrenaline surging through my veins. Reality warped around me as the ground trembled, the console sparking ominously beneath my fingertips. An inhuman shriek echoed, and the shadows danced madly, blurring the lines between my consciousness and the twisted reality of this place. And then, in a moment that stretched into infinity, the creature lunged, a tide of despair crashing over me. That I felt its dark embrace, sharp teeth grazing my skin, and in that harrowing second, as my vision blurred and faded into black, the final echo of Elliot's name pierced the air. Don't. Everything went silent. When the silence shattered, it was not just Lydia being thrust back into existence. She woke as though halved between two worlds, acutely aware of both the cosmic dread and the raw, frigid air peculating against her skin. The room around her was no longer pulsating, rather, it had settled into a cold, unyielding desolation, as if something had died within it. The console lay dark, a solemn reminder of what she had witnessed, the grotesque visage of Elliot trapped, his eyes wide with fear. Desperation clawed at her throat. She scrambled to her feet, forcing herself to breathe, to focus. The flickering shadows around the room lurked, retreating momentarily as if holding their breath, watching her movements with a patient hunger. Not far from where she stood, a door appeared, a simple metal exit, rusted at the edges, strangely unfamiliar yet distinctly promised. She dashed for it, the echoed whispers of her past and the tortured cries of trapped souls spiraling within her mind. With every step, the air thickened, laden with an oppressive weight that made it difficult to breathe. Each footfall resonated through the metallic floor like a countdown. As she grasped the cold handle, a baleful wind howled through the control room, swirling like an ethereal tempest that coalesced into a voice. You cannot escape the pact, Lydia. The darkness feeds upon your fear, and it knows your heart. It resonated from the cracks, the very walls echoing the lament of the damned. Shut up. She screamed, yanking the door open and stepping out into an unlit corridor. The starkness of the hallway disoriented her, filled with shapes dancing in the corners of her vision that faded the moment she turned to confront them. A faint humming echoed in the distance, the familiar pulse of the reactor. Narrowing her focus, she moved with purpose, shutting out everything but the thought of Elliot, of freeing him from the chained fate that ensnared him. But the corridor was an impossibly long stretch of despair, lined with flickering lights that threatened to snuff out with each quickening pace. Every sound, every breath weighed heavily with dread. Suddenly, a flash erupted from a door to her left, casting long shadows across her path. Heart pounding, she hesitated, instinctively drawn to the warmth emanating from within. Cautiously, she pushed the door, its hinges protesting like echoes from another time. Inside, the room was a fractured reflection of a laboratory, glowing screens displaying chaotic data, distorted images of the reactor swirling in fiery crimson. And there, amidst the chaos, shadowed dots of light floated, projecting in and out of existence, flickering like dying stars. She stepped closer, overwhelmed by the beauty and terror of it all. The voices coalesced again, this time in a harmonious chorus, each note tugging at her emotions, merging sorrow with hope. Help us, they intoned, a choir of souls trapped in the limbo of the reactor, caught between the world and the darkness that loomed for them. We are tethered to your despair. Free us, useless. She shouted back, hands trembling. I don't have the strength to save you, let alone Elliot. The melody shifted, turning sinister, the shadows elongating, feeding on her despondence, buoying the old sentiments deeper into her heart. Longing and guilt washed over her, reflecting the reality of her situation as they twisted into painful reminders of choice. Her breaths came faster, panic uncoiling like a serpent. Then, as the air thickened with tension, two figures emerged from the murky depths of the shadow, specters of lost souls, their faces distorted with anguish, mouths twisted into paralyzing screams. One reached out to her, fingers elongating, fragmented memories swimming in its haunted eyes. You made a promise, Lydia. A promise that wants payment. No. She gasped, stepping back, the shadowed figures advancing relentlessly. They reached for her, desperate to reclaim the warmth of life they lost. Their voices morphed into a jarring symphony, the blend of agony and desperation tearing at her sanity, with every ounce of her being. She turned away, heart pounding loud enough for the shadows to hear, sprinting back into the corridor. The thrum of the reactor grew louder now, alive and malevolent, a pulsation drowning out her resolve. She sought escape, every echoing scream spiraling behind her like an ominous chant, but in her escape, she collided with a solid form. The darkness swelled, a visceral dread unfurling like storm clouds. Lydia, Elliot's voice broke through the chaos, calm and haunting. You should not have come here. The world groaned to a stillness, shadows inching closer, wrapped around her body like a coffin, as Lydia's heart ached at the sound of his voice. She turned to face him, disbelief and hope igniting, but his form shimmered, flickering like an old reel, his haunted eyes holding more than she could bear to comprehend. Help me, he urged, but Lydia sensed something more in the shadows behind him, a malevolent presence, a monstrous grin hidden now in the dark that had become hungry again, and in a heartbeat, the shadows leaped, a cacophony of chaos encapsulating her cries, and the darkness surged forth like a wave, hungry for what remained of her spirit. Lydia realized, in that second, her choice was no longer about saving Elliot but saving herself or succumbing to the very shadows thirsting for ruin. And amidst that choice, a blinding light burst forth in that realm of horrors, pulling her back toward a twisted fate, leaving her trembling on the edge of an unimaginable abyss. The blinding light reached out like a frigid hand, enveloping Lydia before she could comprehend the weight of her decision. Time twisted and stretched as she screamed, the sound echoing through the chamber of horrors. Just as suddenly as it ignited, the light faded, snuffing out like a candle in the wind, and she was plunged into darkness, suspended in a void. Panic clawed at her throat. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. It was as if the very fabric of reality conspired to trap her within its depths. But then, the darkness quivered, and a whisper slithered through the stillness, a silk thread of malice that wrapped around her heart. "Welcome back, Lydia," the voice cooed, slithering in from every corner. She strained against the invisible bindings, a deep dread crawling beneath her skin. Had she been cast into some unspeakable fate? Suddenly, she was released, tumbling forward onto a cold, metallic surface. The sudden impact jolted her senses. She opened her eyes, heart racing, to find herself in what appeared to be a control room much like the one she'd just left. But instead of the dim glow of screens, this place was blanketed in shadows that coiled tightly around her like a shroud. The humming sound of the reactor was amplified here, a living beast resonating with heartbeats, drowning out her thoughts, forcing her to focus in survival. She staggered to her feet and eyed her surroundings, clenching her fists. Flickering fluorescent lights punctuated the darkened corners, illuminating the faces of twisted mannequins frozen in place, eyes wide, mouths agape as if eternally screaming. Each step she took felt weighted with voyeuristic intent, the shadows shifting, swirling, mirroring her movements. She resisted the instinct to run, knowing the tendrils of fear would only feed the entity lurking around her. Instead, courage grounded her feet, pushing her to the corner where shadows reigned supreme, the very place she had fled before, now beckoning her closer. "Help us!" The haunting voices emerged once more, a chorus of long-forgotten souls echoing from within the mannequins. The twisted figures leaned forward, their faces shifting, melding into something that whispered of broken promises and betrayal. "Leave me alone!" Lydia shouted, the desperation in her voice breaking the fragile stillness. But the silhouettes only advanced, faces morphing into grotesque caricatures of the people she once loved. Each apparition represented a choice, a moment etched in time, a spirit begging for recognition and release. And then, from among them, she saw Elliot's visage, bathed in an eerie glow that illuminated the room, a fragment of hope in a sea of despair. "Lydia," he breathed, his voice an ethereal echo that choked her. "Trust me, this isn't over." As she pondered his words, the shadows surged and breathed around her, thickening like a miasma of malevolence. Lydia's heart hammered against her ribs. She knew this encounter could lead her back to the very depths of torment she had fought so hard to escape. The voices morphed again, an insidious beckoning that wrapped around her mind. "Leave the past behind," they hissed, the gravity of their temptation pulsing in the air. "Embrace what must come with every ounce of will." Lydia clung to her memories of Elliot, not the shape twisted with torment before her, but the real man filled with laughter and warmth. She ripped her gaze from the figures surrounding her, honing in on the control panel flickering with fury as if pleading for her to act. Fumbling for the controls, she felt the depths of desperation clawing at her, urging her to manipulate the reactor's systems to collapse the barrier between the worlds and forge a path for those lost souls. But for every flick of a switch, she could sense a growing darkness, tainting every waking thought, pressing in around her as if to enhance the chaos. "Don't." Elliot's voice surged against the chorus of careening whispers. "You don't understand what you're inviting in." But already, hands of darkness reached for her, clawing in an insatiable frenzy. In a frenzy, Lydia flipped another switch. A decision snatched from the jaws of foresight. A groan resonated from the reactor, and the shadows swarmed, thickening into a chaotic whirlwind. Then, without warning, a massive tremor rippled through the ground, shaking the very foundation of the plant. Lydia's heart seized with fear, and she braced herself against the panel, but there was no stopping what had been unleashed. The room around her erupted in screams, the shattered visages of the mannequins melting away, merging into a storm of howling desperation. The very walls began to splinter, and darkness erupted forth, wrapping around her body like a vice, threatening to engulf her wholly. Amidst the swirling chaos, Lydia caught a final glimpse of Elliot, his face now one of utter darkness, merciless and haunting. "You've done it now," he whispered, "now they'll come for you, too," and with that, the unrelenting abyss surged forward, swallowing her in its depths, transforming her screams into echoes of empty despair. In an instant, Lydia was surrounded by a cacophony of entities, clawing and grasping for her soul, dragging her down into the unfathomable depths of their tormented existence. But as she descended into oblivion, there came a familiar flicker of radiance from the twisted chasm, a distant glow that pulsed with determination. It was the reactor. And beyond it, Lydia sensed something more sinister awakening, that if she didn't act quickly, it may reclaim not just her, but the very last threads of humanity buried within the shadows. The reactor pulsed violently, the crimson glow spilling across the chaotic maw that threatened to swallow her. Lydia fought against the pulling tide, grasping for the pulsating light. Each inch she gained against the thrashing force reminded her of an unseen weight pressing down on her, an oppressive fog that sought to suffocate hope itself. "Lydia!" came Elliot's voice from somewhere above the cacophony, though it was distorted, like a dream slipping through her fingers. "You mustn't give in." In an instinctive battle against despair, she reached for the reactor's controls, her heart racing, fingers trembling. But the voices swirled around her, rising in a discordant blend of sorrowful wails and vengeful roars. They clawed at her sanity, promising release from her torment. All she had to do was let go. "What do you want?" she screamed into the whirlpool of shadows, her words lost in the maelstrom. The shadows surged toward her with renewed vigor. She could almost make out faces, haunting reminders of those she couldn't save, eating away at her resolve. It was as if the darkness itself were a sentient being, feeding off her fear, growing stronger, more empowered with each passing heartbeat. Suddenly, it wrenched her back into a Visiona memory that clawed its way forth from the shadows, raw and brutal. She was back in the main hall of the power plant, frantically searching for Elliot, her breath hitching in her throat. They had been laughing moments earlier. The tour had just begun. She could still hear the hum of the reactor behind her, the warning alarms wafting through the crisp, sterile air. But as the memory played out, echoes of something darker tainted her vision. Flashes of the plant's history collided with her present. She saw faint outlines of workers' faces petrified in agony, their shadows imprinted into the floor, begging for liberation from their eternal suffering. The voices grew in volume, wrapping around her like a suffocating shroud. "We are the lost," they chanted. "The forgotten. Feed us." She staggered, grappling for any semblance of control. The reactor's light pulsed in tandem to her racing heart, and with a sudden clarity, a grim realization washed over her. Every flip of the switch, every command fed into the machine, bore the weight of those souls. They had not only been bound to it but had become a part of its mechanism, an insatiable hunger for life. No more. Lydia cried, her rage igniting a flicker of defiance against the oppressive gloom. She lunged forward, grasping the control panel fully. With urgency, she began inputting a series of commands, bypassing the base protocol, desperate to break the cycle. She could feel the tendrils of darkness wrap more tightly around her, but she pressed on, driven by survival. As the lights blared in response, a violent pulse surged through the reactor. The shadows howled, convulsing as they writhed, a sinister dance of chaos. Startling flashes illuminated the control room, casting the figures of those souls against the walls in grotesque silhouettes. Lydia gritted her teeth, determined to sever the chains binding them. "Don't." Elliot's voice cut through the storm, a desperate plea emerging from the depths of shadows. "You're awakening something you can't contain," but her fingers danced across the panel, weaving a desperate pattern in a race against time. The reactor rumbled, a furious growl reverberating through the control room. She heightened the output, amplified the core, fighting back against the encroachment of despair. In that moment, a surge of recognition ignited within her, a flash of muted faces caught in the floodlight of reality. They were workers, lost souls consumed by their own hubris, enshrined in this power plant, forever part of its twisted fate. And her actions had begun to sever the bonds, awakening something ancient and hungry beneath the surface. Suddenly, the temperature within the room surged as the reactor reached a critical state. Alarms blared, a deafening cacophony igniting an adrenaline rush that spiraled out of control. The shadows howled in agony, splintering and tearing as they began to collapse under the weight of their own collective despair, but it was too late. The reactor pulsated one final time, a blinding flash of light erupting from within. Lydia raised her arms, shielding her eyes from the impending blast. She barely registered the frantic screams around her, her body suspended in a time warp, held as if in an embrace with death itself, a veil of light both blinding and transcendent, and then nothing but silence. With hesitant caution, she lowered her arms to find herself standing alone in a desolate husk of the control room, the beeping alarms dwindling into echoes. Shadows rested where the figures had been, flickering like candle flames as if debating their presence in this newly reclaimed space. Her breath hitched as she took in the ghostly aftermath, a sense of disbelief washing over her. Just then, the flickering light strained against the encroaching gloom one last time. In the corner, a figure emerged, wrapped in shadow but unmistakably familiar. It was Elliot. He stood silent, his expression somber, haunted, as the darkness coiled tightly around him, refusing to let go. "Lydia," he began, but no more words came, only a shivering breath that felt like a warning. That a shattering sound echoed from the reactor room, a crack splitting the walls and vibrating the very floor beneath her feet. With terror clawing at her throat, Lydia turned only to see the shadows coalesce behind Elliot. They surged forward with a hunger that promised nothing but despair. "Run!" she screamed, her heart thunderous, but as she reached for him, the darkness swallowed him whole, leaving her gasping in horror, and in that moment, all the lights flickered out, plunging her into suffocating darkness. I stumbled back, breathless, the reality of what had just unfolded crashing into me like a tidal wave. No. Not like this. I had freed the trapped souls, hadn't I? But as the darkness embraced me, I felt an overwhelming weight of dread, an insidious whisper clawing at the edges of my sanity. "Elliot!" I croaked, but the word tasted like ash on my tongue. The control room was eerily quiet now, the shadows creeping back into their corners, rearing like vengeful serpents. The chaos of the reactor had engulfed me, but it was the emptiness that filled the void, echoing with the laughter of a darkness now insatiable. The glow of the reactor felt like a distant star, pulled into a black hole, swallowing any scrap of hope. That I turned away from where Elliot had vanished, seeking to flee the horror, but the room morphed around me, impossibly expansive, each step drawing me deeper into a labyrinth of despair. The depths of the shadows twisted into grotesque shapes, distorted faces peering out, curling into sinister grins that sent chills racing down my spine. "Help us!" The lamenting chorus rose again, a cacophony of lost souls drenching my mind with guilt and anguish. Each plea sank into my soul like barbed wires, reminding me of their tragedies, blending with my reality and churning within the shadows. I was tethered to them, somehow becoming what I had so pitifully tried to escape. Then came a flicker light from the reactor, pulsing erratically, as if the very essence of life was struggling to surface. I couldn't just stand here, I had to act. I had always buried my fear under layers of doubt, but now, the darkness was no longer an external threat, it had become a part of me, feeding off the residue of my choices. That I sprinted toward the control panel, adrenaline coursing through my veins, and stood there, fists clenched, staring at the screens flickering with energy, chaos swarming to consume my resolve. In that moment, everything clicked into place: Elliot's whispers, the desperate pleas of the souls, the insistent pounding of my heart. I had awoken something in the reactor, something I had never been meant to understand. "Lydia," Elliot's voice echoed, deeper, more authoritative now, reverberating from the depths of the darkest shadows, even as I pressed virtual buttons. "You are the one. You always have been. But the balance was never yours to break. Stop it!" I shouted, striking the console harder, the lights dimming before flaring back to life as a wave of shadows curled around me, their hunger palpable. "I won't let you take me." But the more I fought, the more the shadows coalesced into tangible forms, the lost ones writhing in agony, voices swelling to a fever pitch. "Help us. We are here because of you. That's when I realized I hadn't merely uncovered the horror of this place, I had awakened its hunger. And now, the darkness needed me to feed its souls, my soul. The reactor's violent pulse beckoned to me, bright and blaring, drawing every ounce of my fear into its core, yet holding on to some flickering semblance of power still locked inside the spirit of Elliot fighting against the shadows desiring to claim him. That I faced the console, hands trembling, and pressed the buttons frantically, praying for some gradual unbinding a path to release both Elliot and the souls I had tangled myself with. The machine hummed back, the lights pulsating with energy, crackling with promise. I was pulling strings beyond my control, a puppeteer in a play where I didn't know the plot, and the actors were resuming their release a never-ending cycle of despair, and then it happened. The reactor surged with a brilliance that split the shadows, echoing with tortured screams. I closed my eyes tightly and channeled every regret, every ounce of lost hope into the pulsing energy. As the room illuminated with brilliant light, I felt the tether of despair tightening around me, pulling me towards something horrific that loomed just beyond my reach. Lydia. Elliot's voice surged, breaking through the chaos. You're awakening the darkest of all its true essence. If you unleash it, well, all be consumed. Hungry shadows clawed at me, but inside, light unexpectedly flickered. With one last desperate breath, I drew up the echoes of all that had been before me, dreams, my laughter, all tainted with the grief of not just my journey but their journeys. I pressed hard, channeling that light. Please, be free. The room shook, the walls cracking, shadows spilling outwards like ink spreading across paper. The air grew thick and heavy as if the weight of my choices bore upon my shoulder, so weight heavier than I had ever imagined. That I, in that instant, unleashed fury erupted. Shadows screeched, their forms twisting and writhing, fracturing and splitting, scattering dark remnants that bubbled up like cruel laughter. And I knew as the shadows began to fray that Elliot's essence clung in the remnants. He resisted, grasping for the light. Lydia. He cried again, his voice melding with the shadows, tugging at my heart. I cannot hold this forever. I hesitated, caught between wanting to fight and wanting to flee. I could feel the darkness shifting, curling and dancing hungrily around me, ready to claim its prize. And in that profound moment, I understood I was the vessel. I reached out to the reactor control yet again, hands hovering above the buttons. If you want freedom from this darkness, then I'll be the one to reclaim it. I will bear witness we are the light that terminates this darkness. And with that proclamation, I slammed my palms against the console one final time, praying it would amplify the confused chorus of light amidst the dark, awakening all the souls entwined within their torment. And just as the light flared brighter than the night, it was as though the air screamed around me, breaking apart as the shadows collapsed inward amid writhing cries. The reactor erupted into beamed streams of chaotic energy, clashing violently against the encroaching void. With one last moment before being swallowed, I saw Elliot's tortured face, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of gratitude and farewell, casting light through the chaos that had bound us. It's time, he breathed, fading into the storm, and abruptly everything split apart, vaporizing with chilling clarity. But then came an unspeakable darkness, a realization beyond the abyss, a paradox that coiled in upon itself even as it shattered through every shard of my essence. For as the last sliver of light extinguished, laughter echoed through every corner of my mind, a chilling reverberation reminding me that this power would never truly be gone, that I would always remain a shard caught forever between worlds, woven into the fabric of darkness that yet awaited. Welcome back, Lydia, the shadows whispered, the words filling the empty void. You never left.